Hi everyone. Different presenter in front of the thing today. So welcome to Stephen Vizinczey's video channel. Unfortunately, Stephen not so well today. He's sitting just not so far away from us, but he's really tired. But we really wanted to do another book review. Just to let you know, I'm Matthew Mackenzie. My book that I'm also an author. But we just wanted to rush out another review anyway. And here, who we have here sitting next to us today?
My name is Clare Parker. I'm a friend of Matthew's and also of Stephen's. My main career has been in teaching, but I've also done some writing too.
Brilliant, brilliant. But yeah, it's been a while since we've reviewed a book. I think it was a week ago we did The Idiot, I believe, isn't it?
Yes, we did. Yes.
And I hope you enjoyed that. It's quite a deep book, asks lots of questions, and people do enjoy reading that. I think, it's always good to delve into deep books and just reflect on yourselves. And today's no different, because today what we're going to look into in a bit of a philosophical discussion is this book here called I don't know if you can see it that clearly, it's called The Stranger by Albert Camus. And I believe you read this book some time ago.
Many years ago.
Many years ago. Quite a famous book if you're into philosophy.
Indeed, yes.
And I dug around Stephen's library. He's got like a massive set of books there, and we came across this book. Stephen, he's not in the picture. I'm sure he might say something.
Can I say a word about the translation?
Oh yes, go ahead.
The French edition of the book is called L'Étranger, and The Stranger could be a translation of that, but I think a much better translation would be The Outsider, because a stranger could be anybody from another country, but the outsider is somebody who is outside society.
And this book certainly pushes the limits in regards to how someone just does not fit in. Questions are literally thrown at, I suppose you could call a person who's the central theme of the story. I think, what is his name? Massou, yeah. And the book was published I believe in 1942. And it tells a story of a mysterious person in some sense, who seems to do things out of the habit, the most terrible things. The book opens with a famous saying. I'll just open it. And it says here, the mother died today, or maybe yesterday. I can't be sure. Now, if you're thinking, hang on, if your mother died, or someone that's raised you had died, you'd sort of think to yourself, how can a person be thinking like this? If someone who's loved me, which is mostly the case anyway, all my life, and they died, I wouldn't sort of come up with such an apathetic comment in that way. And the book is looking towards the apathy of the character. Now, this book, I suppose, was written after the time when France had a difficult time in the war, and this is leading off to Jean-Paul Sartre also, when he brought in these existentialist movement, which led to questions on, what is the meaning of life? Is there any meaning in regards to the suffering of life? Because this is the case, I believe, Camus' dad served in the war, and then he also served in the war as well, didn't he?
I think he did.
Yeah.
Yes.
So he saw a lot of suffering, he must have done. And this was not just within philosophic circles, this was generally in France. People were looking for meaning from a very difficult time coming from the war. And the book raises challenges and questions. And the one thing I want to raise in this thing basically is, a bit about Camus, actually. I believe he wasn't your typical philosopher, was he?
I'm not so sure about that.
Well, it's the way he lived his life. When you think of philosopher, you think of someone sitting down in the study by his desk with a pipe and a cap.
That's true.
And when when we were researching into the book and researching into the philosopher, all we were hearing from Albert Camus, he was almost acting as if he was a playboy. He didn't seem to want to be sitting down writing all the time.
He was immersed in life, real life as we know it,
Yeah.
unlike other philosophers perhaps. He was.
and he played for a football team, I believe.
Did he? Oh.
Yeah, they won some tournaments.
Oh, wonderful.
He was a flirt. Like Stephen was a flirt as well in the younger days. So he probably could relate to In Praise of Older Women. If he would have loved the book if he read In Praise of Older Women. Mm-hmm. Well, younger women, I suppose. But yeah, I mean, I suppose because of the way he lived his life, he was also criticised by other philosophers, saying, well, you know, the way he's, how can he write all this stuff and, you know, do these things? Usually with philosophy, you study, you know, heavily into your subject, and that's that. Nevertheless, that was one of his passions, to try and raise the question and get some solutions on the idea that, you know, life has no meaning. In fact, to be fair, it wasn't just life had no meaning, but life is absurd, and this is perhaps what launched, you know, in regards to the absurdity of life. Although it does focus on relating to someone who's actually outside the norms of society, because when you think about it in our lives, we live to norms. If you don't live to norms, we're going to get punished. I don't know if there are any spoilers in this book, but the book does throw a challenge to readers, in the sense that the challenge is there a way to relate to the character in the book? Even though when we our first glance, we think we can't relate to this person. Let's look at what he's saying about his mother. You know, look what happens in an instant. He actually kills someone. And I say, well, I don't want to say spoilers, but there is some spoilers, I have to admit it. But let's get into the first question about the book. You know, first thing to yourself, and I'll try and answer it myself in some ways. I mean, do you agree in Albert's version, I suppose, about the absurdity of life? Is life that absurd? Does it have no meaning at all, that it's completely stupid? And it goes one step beyond existentialism. Mm-hmm. Existentialism sort of says, look, you know, life has no meaning, and that's it. But you can find some meaning in your actions. I know a famous sort of saying from Jean-Paul Sartre is that we have to sort of be responsible for our actions. I don't know what the saying is. Is it something to do with bad faith? I'm not too sure.
Right. Yes.
Well, Albert Camus is taking it a step further, saying, well, you know, if you're trying to find, you know, meaning in life, you're going to wear yourself out. It's that absurd, and it relates to his other work. I think it's Myth of Sisyphus. You won't go into that, but one bit I will mention of Myth of Sisyphus is the idea that, you know, Sisyphus was condemned, wasn't he, for rolling a boulder up a hill.
Back. Yes.
The thing is that he's chasing the boulder down the hill to roll it back up. Yeah, that's absurd. Because if I was condemned to push a boulder up the hill, when it reaches that top of that hill, I'm going to just
stay there.
Well, no, yeah, I'm going to let it roll down. I'm going to chase after it. But going back to this book anyway, absurdity. And you don't have to be honest, you don't really have to read, I don't think you have to read a book to question certain things. I mean, do you feel life is absurd in a way?
No, I don't. But I think perhaps a lot of people do. The reason that a lot of people don't even think about the word absurdity in relation to their lives is because they have been brought up in one religion or another. And religion denies absurdity. Whatever it is, a Christian religion, a Muslim religion, a Jewish religion, it doesn't matter. It gives a structure to life that people can follow. So absurdity doesn't enter into the question. We follow the rules, we follow the patterns of the religion, and life is rosy.
And, you know, that's a very important point you raised there, because there's always been a battle between philosophy and religion, going back all the way from the Dark Ages, and this leads on to the idea of science. Science came into it saying, listen, you can't just believe that a creator did all this for you. We're living in perilous times, want to make life better, we have to find ways of solving, you know, problems in life, like inventing things. Not to say that there's no value in religion, but this
book used to say that religion, whatever it was, Catholicism, whatever, it was a crutch.
Yeah.
And in a sense, there is some sense in that because people adhere to it because it gave some meaning to their life. And as long as they followed the rules and regulations of whatever religion it was, they were okay.
Mm. And I believe there's actually one section in this book where, what's his name again? Masu was questioning about when he was in jail, I believe, isn't it? Mm-hmm. He was questioning the themes of God, and I believe it was.
It's also about society. He was condemned because he didn't cry when his mother died.
That's right.
And that was considered a crime. It's ridiculous, really.
And you've said it there, it's ridiculous, it's absurd.
It is absurd, exactly.
And at first glance, I suppose, one thing with this book is, when you're reading it as a young person, as a teenager, then these things, you know, you're trying to find your way in life. And you read the book and you think, oh, this is an interesting concept. Mm-hmm. You know, all my life, all my sort of life up to the teen years, I've been told what to do, where to go. So it's sort of a rebellion against someone. But when you're reading it, when you're sort of older age, you sort of think, oh, hang on, you've got to earn your living, innit? You've got to go to work. You
have to conform to a certain degree. You have to conform to whatever stricter society has imposed upon you. Yeah. And if you don't, you're going to suffer.
As this book says, I mean, I don't think the book gives an answer straight off, but it's challenging you to think. Mm-hmm. And I do agree, I suppose, that there comes a time in our life when, we do begin to question things, and we do think, every day I'm going to work, every day I'm making money, every day the government's taking the money away, taxing me to the hill, every day.
And you think, what's it for?
Yeah.
What's it all for?
And if you're unlucky enough, and I do believe sometimes there's a bit of luck depending on not only how you're raised, but where you're raised in the community, whether you're raised in a religious community or a place where there's education, or in a certain country where you don't have education. And this throws questions at existentialism, because I think there's a counter argument to existentialism that people can't always be they can't always be who they're set out to be, because there's certain things that in society you just don't have access to, and one of it is education. Sometimes a criticism of philosophy is that only those who are very educated, it sort of leans towards that the value is in education, but there's no value for those who are not educated, but their idea and experience of life is just as valuable.
Of course, yes. Indeed.
Which is a major criticism. But going back to absurdity, in the time it was written in, he has a point, because it was a difficult time, and there are a lot of questions. As I said, France has just come from 2 world wars, absolutely horrific.
He wrote it before the Second World War. He wrote it in 1942. Which I think is correct, is that right?
That's right.
Before
absolutely.
The Second World War, yes. But they had the experience of the First World War.
And this I'm leading on to, what's his name again? It was
Sean.
Sartre and his movement, because he was asking similar questions.
Yes, that's right.
And he looked around to see all the suffering, so you can see the relation. Mm-hmm. And to be honest, if you're a happy person, would you be asking these questions?
Probably not, because you would be perfectly happy with the world that had been created for you, and which you conformed to, and you stayed there, and you didn't question. And that's the same with, I think, a lot of people.
Yeah.
A lot of religions have been constructed to appease people's fears and to let them lead a life where they're not questioning too much. That's an important point. But to make them happy. Whatever sufferings come their way, whatever religion they have adopted would be designed to appease them, to make them feel a bit better. I think a lot of people see religion, whatever religion it is, as a refuge.
And some people can go as far to say sometimes philosophy can be a refuge. And so, well, certain sections of philosophy, and the reason I'm saying this is he's clashing with it, saying, again, why even bother ask the questions? There's no meaning. And philosophy is the idea of looking for meaning, isn't it?
Right.
Looking for answers,
Absolutely.
Obviously, the more difficult steps of philosophy becomes more complicated. You get lost in it.
I think of Eric Idle on the cross,
Yeah.
in the life of Brian. Do you know what he said? Life's a shit, and then you die.
And then you die. And I'm sure Albert Camus will think, yeah, that's a good take on
That's
life.
pretty profound.
Yeah, but it does go again. You know, if
It's only half the story, though. It's only,
Yeah.
Life can be shitty. There's no anybody who's reached adulthood and has been through years of adulthood knows that life can be a shit. But the other side is that life can be wonderful. Life can be a joy.
yeah,
And we mustn't forget that side of it.
and this is where Albert Camus agrees actually, because even though he says, look, you can't really find that meaning in life because it's absurd anyway, and there is examples when you look through history. You think to yourself, hang on, why did this event happen? You know, people are so stupid and so silly. Why did this happen? But he's sort of saying at the same time, you know, you're not restricted to these norms. Yeah, there's a price to pay, depending on the situation. But you've got life. There's no reason to just... One thing is nihilism. He was against it, wasn't he?
Yes, he was.
The idea of nihilism that,
Giving
well,
up
there's no point.
completely.
Because he questioned if there's no meaning to life, if it's absurd, then is there any point of living? In fact, would you agree with that? Is there any point of living, or would you feel, no, hang on, there is...
Oh, there are many reasons for living.
Yeah.
You might have children, so their future depends on you, so you look to them. You might have a job that you adhere to and you're interested in and you want to progress. You might be a writer and you've got another book on it. There are many, many reasons for wanting to go on living. Many. And even just going for a walk on a sunny day and listening to the birds or being absorbed in nature. There are multifarious reasons for wanting to live.
That's right. And it does depend again on, you know, how, you know, you were brought into life, how you were raised. I do feel education does have an impact. Nature versus nurture. Yeah, he does question these things. He does question the norms, but I wouldn't deny a person, you know, to feel, you know, the sun on their skin, to go out and have a walk, to appreciate certain fine things, because that's what Albert Camus did anyway. It wouldn't be fair to say to someone, you know, life's absurd, but and there probably is no meaning to it. So therefore, you shouldn't, you know, adhere to certain norms. But on the other side of it, sometimes I do feel certain norms do squeeze people to the point where they're not actually living, but sort of not even existing, but
On the threshold of life.
yeah,
Yeah.
doing things. You know, the famous saying, you know, we're not human doings, we're human beings. And this was the thing in regards to both philosophies. You know, the idea existentialism, being there is a famous phrase. Being present in that moment, not being pushed, especially by religion, unfortunately.
Religion has many sins to answer for. I was brought up as a Catholic, so the enemy was Protestants, which was terrible for a child to grow up in that environment. It really was. The Catholics were right. We had the Pope and all the rest of it. And we had to feel sorry for Protestants because they weren't Catholics. Can you imagine? Which is very wrong, of course.
And it still, unfortunately, sadly, still goes on today. Sorry, had to stop filming for a bit because I had to turn on the light. It was getting a bit dark. But I believe Claire wanted to actually ask this important question. And I asked, you can't remember now.
No, tell me.
Yes, you wanted to ask how I was sort of, if I was raised in any religion.
Oh yes, I want that.
So go on, I'll let you ask
interested
it.
to know.
Yeah, and
So, what's the answer?
and it, you know, it sort of lets me give my views on the whole concept of, you know, what he's proposing here, which is serious questions nevertheless. And yeah, it was half and half for myself because my parents always felt that I should always have the freedom to make up my own mind.
Really? That was unusual at the time for parents to have that kind of attitude.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We, you know, believe in God. I mean, my mum was very strict in religion.
Was she?
I don't think my dad wasn't so. But they came to agreement saying, you know, okay, if you're interested in Christianity, You can stay with it, and for a time I was. You know, I like the message. And who doesn't? We're born into this world, hence as existentialism, you're thrown into this world. You're trying to work out your place in the world. You know, you had no control of it. You were thrown into the world. You
That's right.
oh no, we're not really talking about it. So it's the absurdity we're really talking about. You can see that there's some relations. So there's this urgency. You know, you're in this world. You're thrown in. You're trying to make sense of the world. But you get a head start in some sense, or maybe, you know, if your parents were loving, wise, and wanted to see the best, give you the best start in life.
That's right.
This is not the case for everyone.
No,
Some
of
people
course
get a bad start, and as you mentioned, with highly religious parents, they could say the religion is the only answer. You know, don't these books are the devil's books. Don't be reading that. Don't be asking questions of God, or not in just God. There's other religions. Not fair to just pick on Christianity. I think religion in general. So
Jewish religion, Christianity.
yeah, and we're not being nasty to religions. It's just one of the things in philosophy. I do feel there's values in faith. You know, that's the value of religion. That faith is the driving factor, and it's not looking for a
Consoles
solution.
people. It consoles them against all the slings and arrows that life can throw at them.
Yeah.
And it gives them something to hope for. So there we are.
But again, with this book, it's not as and I do struggle to find words. It's not as dead end in some sense as nihilism, because Albert Camus was against that sort of thing. He said, otherwise he would have said, well, you know, if there's nothing worth to live for, you know, commit suicide. But he said, no, you know, there is in some sense. But the enemy was having a waste of a life where you're all these norms, you know, this strict sense of belonging and having the safe life where you're not the outsider, you're not a stranger, but knowing for sure that this is the life, when the challenge of life is finding your place in life, and, you know, being brave enough to ask these deep, challenging questions, sometimes even dangerous questions. I mean, it's not an easy question to ask, whether, you know, is there any meaning to life? That is a heavy question. But I do feel, once in your life, if you should be asking these things, especially in a time where things are very difficult for people. I'm talking about, you know, the pandemic, how you know, it's really destroyed a lot of people's lives. You know, people have lost loved ones, you know, lost work, and they start to question things, rightly so. And they feel like, you know, the government's not protecting them, the health service is not protecting them as well. And it's only fair to ask, well, hang on, you know, what is the meaning of life? And it's not to say it's always the bad things that throw people to ask these questions. Philosophy is also about enjoying. You know, people should enjoy philosophizing anyway. We have minds, why not use it? So it should be fun. But at the same time, there should be dark, challenging questions books like these should raise. So I'm gonna ask yourself a quick question, Claire. You know, why should anyone bother reading this book today? Because it does sound a bit depressing in some sense. I mean, it's not. I don't think it's an easy, you know, book to read in regards to relating to the character. You know, there's a question of whether we feel sorry for the stranger, or we feel pity for someone who doesn't have any, you know, any love for his mother. I do struggle. He has a girlfriend who wants to marry him. Doesn't even sort of relate. Doesn't seem to. He seems really apathetic about love. You know,
That's
you know, she's actually. Don't want to take the mickey. You know, when women hint, and she actually keeps hinting to him. You know, do you love me? You know, she's hinting to him, and he's saying, you know, c'est la vie. You know, yeah, I suppose so. Just shrugs his shoulders, doesn't seem to care. You know, so
it's a very truthful book.
Yeah.
It's full of truths that most people will not like to admit to.
Yeah.
You know? So it's quite a disturbing book from that point of view.
As some sense, some philosophic questions should be. But you can enjoy philosophy. It's not always dark, deep, and questions our own existence. There's loads of things in philosophy that you'll certainly have lots of fun looking into. But is that your sort of take on the book on why anyone should read Stranger?
Yes, because it's full of truths.
Full of truths,
Yeah.
and you can sort of relate in some sense.
When I was at school, I had a friend, a girlfriend, and she said, one day, why am I not a dog, or a cat, or a worm, or a mosquito? Why?
Yeah.
And I didn't have an answer to it.
I don't think I have an answer to either, but it's a fair
It's a very
question.
good question, actually, for a little girl to ask. Why am I not?
If you find children, very young children, come up with the most difficult questions.
They do.
Even philosophers will think, oh no,
Absolutely.
I don't even be bothering going there asking them. I'm trying to answer those questions, and they'll just give the child like a sweetie or lollipop, just suck on that.
Yeah, you'll be all right.
And don't bother me with those deep, disturbing questions.
You're right.
But for me, anyway, with this book, I do feel that some of them are a bit hard in it. I do feel like it's a book for those who want to rebel, like young people who want to rebel. Yeah, they don't like society. Yeah, and then they sort of grow up and think, oh, well, we're conforming because I've got to go to work and I've got to earn a living.
It's also about society and how society can judge individual people.
Yeah.
I think about Meursault, how he was condemned because he didn't cry at his mother's funeral. When everybody was expecting floods of tears, but he didn't.
Yeah.
It wasn't a crime, that's the way he was. He kept it all inside himself. But society judged him.
Which is very important, because you mentioned something I almost forgot. He's almost like a Christ-like figure. You've mentioned it a few times. In the same way with Jesus Christ, bringing the message, but people not particularly understanding him. And again, this is a society in that period where there's heavy norms and rules, and thinking, he's bringing us this strange message about hope and life and the eternal life. And people are looking at him, judging him, and guess what? He's executed. That's a spoiler, didn't it? But in some sense, it's a message, serious one.
It is.
Stranger, but as I said, do you feel sympathy with Monsieur?
I do, because in the end he's condemned to death, isn't he?
But the reasons, though, can you relate to his reasons? He doesn't seem to really care about his mother, and doesn't care about love. He's killed someone. How can you be sympathetic?
But the day he kills someone, it's incredibly hot.
Yeah.
It's a very,
I don't
very
go
hot
around
day.
killing people.
No,
because
I'm not making excuses for him, but I remember the scene, and the sun has an effect on him, and he pulls the trigger.
Yeah.
It's not an excuse for what he did, because what he did was criminal. It was terrible. He
Yeah.
murdered, and he has to pay the penalty, which is his own life has taken. But he would say he did it because he didn't know what he was doing. It was the sun, it was the heat of the moment. He pulled the trigger.
And for forever and a day, people, rightly so, to be honest, they're going to be questioning him. Why did you do it? Why are you thinking this way? Why? We're asking you these serious questions, and you know what's going to happen. So why are you denying it, or why don't you defend yourself in a certain way? So therefore, you don't have to be in a situation where you're going to be crucified. And a lot of people these days don't want to go into that situation. But I do feel it's important these questions are asked. And perhaps, to be honest, people will just say, this is really, insightful, but then they move on to another stage in philosophy. And that we'll probably talk about in another book. It could be Toussaint, it could be Heidegger, it could be is there a book on postmodernism in fiction? Because that's quite
I don't know.
I'm sure there's loads of books. But yeah, I think what we'll do.
Postmodernism. Well,
And that's another story for another day. That one.
indeed, what's modernism to start with? Anyway.
Again, it does. Well, modernism, I think, is what's now, isn't it? I think. Although postmodernism is it's a philosophy that tends to taunt, and you can't pin it down that easily. But it's not related just to philosophy itself. It's related to all sorts of other.
Yeah.
I'm getting talking to another area. I shouldn't. I'm really bad habit of doing that. But I'd like to say.
That's all right.
I'd say thanks for watching.
Oh.
We'll certainly do more reviews of books, and I do like philosophy. to the point I could talk for ages about it. Not much of an avid reader as Claire. She reads these huge Russian novels and Shakespeare, and I might look at that and we ask her for help. Stephen as well. But I do like a bit of philosophy. So I say thanks again for watching, and we hope to see you again soon. And I'm sure Stephen will be. Well, he's here, but he's just not so well. So if you ever heard of Grown.
You mentioned Shakespeare.
Yeah.
In As You Like It, you've got a character called the melancholy Jacques, and he's a philosopher. And he's a very important character in the play, actually. He's the one whose speech starts with the 7 stages of man, and he goes through all the different stages. Yeah, just when you mentioned Shakespeare, that's brought to mind the melancholy Jacques.
We didn't do a review on that, did we?
No, we didn't.
So
No,
that's
no.
something to look forward to.
As You Like It.
As You Like It. Are you sure we didn't do that one? I can't remember.
I don't think so.
Well, we'll come to that, and that'll be a nice treat for yourself for putting up with us on this one. But again, thanks a lot for watching, and we'll see you again soon.
Bye-bye.